while all of those meetings, permutations are going on, let's bring to bear the reality of Nigeria today and what the government has to do, the kind of work the government has cut out for itself. A few weeks from now, President Muhammadu Buhari is expected to hand over government. But what exactly is he handing over? Let's take a look at some of them. If we could take a peek into President Buhari's handover note, you'll see that, well, the next government will be in charge of subsidy removal or otherwise. He has also, of course, ceded that responsibility of conducting a national census to the incoming government. But that's not all. Let's show you some of the figures, President Buhari's handover figures. And we begin with unemployment. Take a look at that, 33.3%. But the projection recently by KPMG is that it would reach 41%. So that's for unemployment. But poverty rate is also another thing that the president is handing over to the incoming president, 63% poverty rate. That's the multidimensional poverty figures released by the MBS in partnership with other bodies. That's 133 million Nigerians. So that will also be in the handover note, I imagine. What about minimum wage? Well, 30,000 naira. There's been a lot of conversation around whether or not it should be increased and all of that, especially when you convert that into dollars. And that takes me to the next point, the foreign exchange rate. Nigerian naira to the dollar, unofficial rate, or the rate majority of people have access to, is 737 naira. But the official rate, of course, the CBN's exporting rate is 461 naira to a dollar. So when you crunch the minimum wage, divide that by 737, you know what that is. Another figure that this outgoing government will be handing over to the next government, if you were to do that today, will be the inflation rate of 22%. That's double digits, 22%. And the debt, of course, 69 trillion naira. Well, some will say 77 trillion naira, but when you remove the borrowings from states and the FCT, it comes to about that figure. We've put the ways and means, the borrowings for the budget and all of that. So it comes across to that figure. Oh, not forgetting economic growth, the GDP growth for 2022 was 3.1%. And experts have said we need to put this at double digits. But Nigerians get the point. These are the figures that the outgoing government will be handing over to the incoming government. So a lot of these figures aren't looking good. So while they may be smiling in those pictures, the photo ops, those figures aren't smiling. So what should the next government do? Well, let's have this conversation this evening with Oluseun Onigbinde, who is Director of Budget, also Director of Civic Hive. He joins us right here in our Lagos studio. Mr. Onigbinde, it's good to have you.
It's a pleasure being here, Coyote.
You know, when we have these figures and we're trying to wrap our heads around it, we always come to you, the experts, to help us understand. And it's always said that there's always a story behind the figures. We see the figures, inflation, but there's a whole lot of story behind it. So for you, you're not a stranger to these figures. You've been following the trends from as long as a lot of people can remember. What do you see when you see those figures that this outgoing government is handing over to the incoming government?
Yeah, thanks so much. I think the first background to these figures is that in the last 8 years, we had 2 recessions. Growth has not been great. And recently, we've had this jump off to around 3%. It's like you're in a hole and you get up. So it looks like you're growing, but it's not as if we've made significant leaps. And also because of that, there's been significant revenue shortage. This current government has not applied any level of fiscal consolidation or rationing when it comes to expenditure. It has spent as if it had all the money to do, and the way out for that was to borrow a lot of money. I mean, we're taking our domestic debt from around $10 billion to around $41 billion. We've taken our domestic, that's our foreign debt. We've taken our domestic debt from around 8 trillion naira to around 21 trillion. And we have another 24 trillion naira sitting, which I'm sure is around 26 trillion naira now with the CBN. That the federal government still has to pay back, and that's not started with the securitization. So we've had a situation where we've not been able to apply some level of fiscal consolidation to trim the public expenditure. There's been big spending on infrastructure, but I don't think the expense on infrastructure matches the size of funds that have been borrowed or funds that have been spent so far. The challenge is that, and we also have subsidy still being there.
Oh, yeah.
The government has not been bold enough to remove subsidy and just pushed it to the late hour, and possibly would be the migraine of the next government in some way. I feel like on the economy for this government, it's failed woefully. And I say this because if you look at significant decisions that should have been made, we looked at exchange rate, we lost significant value. We got in there with 216. We have to be realistic. We're around 740 is the rate. The CBN can't even give everybody, not even 10% of demand at 416. We still have funds not paid to airline operators. Still hold airline operators. They can't evacuate their funds. And you have inflation. And it's not the luckiest government, let's be honest with ourselves, because you had oil prices went down, production shutdowns. But there were so many things that could have been done, in terms of rationalizing expenditure that were not done. There were things that could have been done in terms of contracting efficiency that were not done. There were things that could have been done in terms of even reworking the entire tax architecture of the country. That were not attempted. So
even with the finance bills that we've seen, you don't think there was enough work done in that?
We still have a situation where you look at the tax waivers, the size of tax waivers that we still have. It's in trillions of naira.
That's too huge.
That's too huge for a country that is significantly looking for revenue. We even had situations where we look at tax architecture. And my tax architecture is not just about putting the rates out and there. To look at payee system, we should collect payee system. To look at VAT, how should we collect VAT and sales tax? To look at corporate income tax, is that the right rate that we should have? We should have been able to look back and rearrange the whole debt. Not just us adding rates and putting exemptions and putting in items in and out. And by the time you also look at that, and I think that's what the next government has to do. The next government has to focus on macroeconomic growth. Macroeconomy has to matter. The sad part of this current government is that because it found a way from the CBN to meet its obligations.
Is that the ways and means?
The ways and means thing. It neglected the fundamental macroeconomic principles. Because that was a strange situation. In the previous government, there was no 24 trillion naira taken from the CBN. But because of that, and that's why you see inflation galloping, putting so much money in the environment, the economy, that is not backed by assets. So you have those money still chasing the dollar. And at the end of the day, you're still going to put pressure on the foreign exchange.
I need to come in here, because you talked about the macroeconomic angle. A lot of people have said, well, what option did this government have anyway? It wanted to meet its obligations, wanted to fund a budget, and it had to do that. So maybe that was a rationale behind that. So for you, did you see alternatives that this government would have explored? You talked about, cutting the cost of governance. You referenced that. Will that have been enough to make up for, the 26 trillion naira? Well, by the way, the government didn't take all of it. It says that some of it was taken by the previous government, maybe a little part of it, but at least for that amount, do you think it will have made up for it?
I feel so. Number one, I think there's this anti-investor sentiment that this government pushed forward early on. And I think they had to walk that back. If you want to have macroeconomic stability for a low-income economy like us, or a middle-income economy, you need to find means to attract FDI. One of the biggest disasters. You look at FDI, we're barely scraping $2 billion annually. And so if you're not positioning yourself and you're not marketing yourself as an investor haven, then that's a big problem. I think that's where we significantly missed it. We took $13 billion in Eurobonds, around in this current cycle of the government. And we didn't use that to even invest in maybe an NLNG train. We didn't use that to say we're significantly fixing our power problems. We just took dollars when we could find dollars. And that's even the bigger rationale to us saying we're going looking for $800 million. There has to be some tactical approach in how we are doing things. If we cannot defend the currency at $400, then we 400 naira or 461, then we know that we have to defend at 700. But we could have opened up the space to be more effective for foreign investors to come in. I think that's the next thing the next government has to do. They need to focus on price stability, focus much more on being ready to attract foreign investment. Because without that, we would continue to seek means to find dollars to borrow, to do reserve management, and it will never just be enough.
You know, the government time and again, and you said that this government has not been the luckiest with the recessions, the COVID-19, the oil prices, and all of that. But the government has found a way to say, well, it's still trying to do well in spite of all of the circumstances. So speak to us about the team, because this incoming government is also trying to put together a team. And for this outgoing government, it's had a team from the cabinet. In fact, there's also been the National Economic Council, which gave the advice on subsidy removal and all of that. So it had a team at different levels. And you said that this government failed woefully. So is it a problem of the team that this government had? Is it the political will, as they always say, which, by the way, is quite vague? A lot of people don't know what it means, but they always say lack of political will. Or was it external factors? What, if you could pinpoint it, what was the major challenge?
First, I think the erosion of the CBN independence was a big problem. You know, when you want to take money, the laws that said CBN could give a certain % of its previous year revenue as ways and means, those laws were there for purposes. And it was to make sure that the federal government was able to sweat enough before it finds the CBN as a last lender of resort. The feeling didn't look as if the federal government needed to sweat. It just made the CBN is piggyback, you know. And because of that, even if you want to take loans from IMF, let's assume that's last lender of resort. IMF comes with conditionalities to say, do this, do that. You know, the independence of the CBN, where they could have said, the federal government, yeah, we know that COVID is in space. We know that there have been significant drop in oil prices, but we need certain reforms before we continue to back you. And these are the kind of things that you expect that would make the federal government to look inwards and say, okay, I'm going to take on this reform, I'm going to take on those things. But if it means like, can you jump? And the question is, how far can I jump? Then you're not going. So the first step that the current next government has to do is, and in terms of the team construction, is how do you preserve the independence of the CBN? Because the CBN exists for two purposes, should actually. Full employment and monetary price stability. Yeah. Now, if the CBN continues to put money in the economy in an haphazard manner, you cannot guarantee price stability in that environment. And that's why you see us, and we've not even removed subsidy, we're already jumping around 20 to 22% inflation rate. So by the time you take out subsidy and sentiment's getting, it can even be far higher than that. So I feel first thing you have to do is look at the CBN structure, because we have a situation where we left the fiscal tools that could be more effective, and we all just jumped into CBN solving almost every problem. And I think that's what I feel really didn't make the economy be effective. No, look at how much you've put in the economy. Look how much debt you put in the economy. Then if you're putting money, Keynesians, they will tell you if you're putting money into the economy, it's for you to be able to generate growth and to be able to take the economy to full employment. So if you're just putting a lot of money in an economy and unemployment numbers are still rising, and poverty index and the poverty numbers are still rising, so it tells you that something is not right. The macroeconomy, which is price stability, which is exchange rate stability, which is also even being able to, the credit flow within the economy, setting that standard to be proper first is what everybody now jumps on. But if you think you keep putting money into the economy in an opposite manner, in not a structured manner, you cannot generate the kind of impact you want.
You know, a lot of people have said that, the incoming government is an APC government as well. So some fear that, will this just be a continuation of what we have seen in the past 8 years? Who knows what will happen to those figures that we reeled out, because they say that it's the same party anyway. It's still the same logo, perhaps even the same philosophy, even though there's a whole conversation about the philosophy of political parties in Nigeria and all of that. But for the incoming government, what should be its focus then, if it will want to have a name or a performance different from this outgoing government? What should it focus on?
I think the first thing the government needs to focus on is what I call fiscal efficiency.
By the way, when I say focus on, I'm talking about the indices that we showed.
Yeah.
Those indices, unemployment, the poverty rates, the inflation. Which needle should they try to move first such that it can create way to tackle others?
If I say focus on the short-term inflation.
Inflation?
Yeah, you need to find a way to stem, especially food inflation. Because if you remove subsidy, if people can still eat at a reasonable amount, then I mean that solves a big part of Nigerian problem.
There's that adage in my culture that once you take away hunger, you've taken away a huge chunk of a person's problem.
So you have to find a way. I mean, food inflation is higher than the regular, the CPI index. So you have to find a way to tackle food inflation.
Is there an easy way out?
There are no easy ways out. But you have to look at the entire value chain and see where exactly are the biggest points of waste, or where are the parts where the component of inflation is happening. Or you have to find a way to dip into your productivity, especially for those crops. Crop production is still around 22% of our GDP. So if there's any place you're going to tackle inflation, it's about crop production and also the entire value chain around it. That's where it is. Second thing I would say focus is non-oil growth, especially non-oil exports. We have to be an economy that exports things outside oil. We're doing well. I mean, the current government, you have to respect that they've taken it forward a bit, but it has to be far more. I mean, we can't be producing $4 billion of non-oil exports and we pat ourselves in the back. We need to quadruple that. We need to, as much as we can go. I mean, Brazil does soya beans export of around $30 billion to EU alone. So if we sit back and just feel that we're fine, we're not good enough. We need to build an economy that is non-oil driven, especially when it comes to export. So how we look at that number?
Talk to us about looking inwards. The cost of governance has been a major issue, and a lot of people think that he will continue his business as usual. In fact, some fear that he may even be higher. So in terms of looking inwards, cutting expenditure, and your words was rationing expenditure, you think that this government was not able to achieve that. So in terms of rationing expenditure, what are those direct or specific areas you want this next government to look at and say, well, we have to cut it lean here?
I think first, I feel that the current government, the next government should have fiscal efficiency. And I start with the culture of the government, because you can say, look into the budget, cut X, Y, Z. No, that's not where you start from. You start for the kind of culture. If it's a culture of like everybody's welcome, there's money on the table, take whatever you have to take your own share, then that becomes like you can't even, to spin out of control. So the culture of fiscal efficiency has to be the first thing the government has to look for. Hey, we are broke. We don't have enough money. So we are trying as much as possible to squeeze water from a stone. But if it feels like, oh, there's always the CBN, there's always the capital market, there's always the bond market, there's going to be somehow be more money from more revenue, we'll be able to sell 1 or 2 or 3 assets, we're always going to have money, then there's always going to be a problem. The second thing is that the federal government also needs to streamline its capital projects. Too many projects that the federal government does, and I think that's where you have to start from. You have a school of fisheries delivering solar lighting systems. You have a college of education building schools in another city. You know, it's just like a contract bazaar. The idea of lawmakers inserting items indiscriminately in the budget is something that, and I was so unfortunate that with the whole discipline toga of the president, he was not able to tackle that. But something that new government has to do, let agencies with the mandate to deliver projects do them. Not just National Assemblymen just talking in projects anywhere they like. There was a lot of inefficiency in that space.
You were talking about the toga of this outgoing administration. There was that talk about discipline when the president was coming in. And I wonder, for this incoming administration, from the antecedents, the pedigree, what kind of toga do you see this government coming in with economically, even generally speaking? How do you think the emergence will hit home? For a lot of people, President Buhari, it was discipline, as you said. Some people said for the first few days, there was constant electricity up until a few days after. So for this incoming government, what do you see the toga being?
I mean, it's left to be seen. I think you can see this is a government coming from Lagos. And I was in Abuja a few days ago, and everybody's saying the Lagos people are coming, and they are vibrant people. I think there's a feeling of a pro-growth government, if it comes on board, that they would focus on taking on big ideas that can turbocharge the economy. I think there's a feeling around that. I see that. Maybe there's also a feeling that there will be a lot of money on the table. I don't know how the reality of that. But there's also a feeling that there was so much money flowing around the system. But that's left for the money to be efficiently spent. Lagos has done some things right, especially when you look at the Lekki corridor, the Lekki Ekpe corridor with the free trade zone and what has happened there in recent times. So I feel most times people will be thinking about these are people who would put private sector ideas forward. Because you can be in the same party, yes, I agree, but your orientation and your awareness of issues are different.
But what about taxation? Questions of taxation, people are wondering. All become of taxation.
We have to
Would we have to pay more? Would they pay less?
It's something that has to happen. We have to be a country that is run on social contract. But at the end of the day, it also means that taxation comes with representation, it comes with questioning and accountability. It also
and you think this incoming government has that pedigree of accountability?
I don't think they've done well with that when they were in Lagos. But there's something that this is at the federal level. And if you want to drive taxation in a significant way, and let's not lie to ourselves, the economy has to be productive before you tax it. And we have to ask ourselves, if you're in Lagos, Lagos is the biggest site, is the biggest component of Nigeria's economy. So if you're going to export that idea to every part, it might not be that easy. But definitely there will be big questions and there will be big demands on the fact that non-oil revenue part has to grow. And that means more taxation or more efficiency in terms of getting people to pay and properly pay.
Very interesting conversation we've had. Mr. Oluseun Onigbinde, Director Budget, thank you so much for your time on the program. Wish you the very best.
Thank you.